Speaking of metadata, when we first got into this business 15 years ago, I had to learn what metadata was. I think it's reached the common consciousness level with everybody having iPhones or phones that take photos. And we know now that it captures the location, the time, unless you've turned off that feature. But even then, there's metadata that is captured whenever you're taking a photograph. So
it's an important point. A cool phrase I heard from an industry colleague is ambient contextual data. It's a mouthful, but what we're talking about here is information that exists out in the ether relating to these documents that you can use to build a story. Think about a matter where somebody's location was important. That's not user-created content that is attached to a GPS tracker, probably on your smartphone. Or think about if you need to look at somebody's work patterns in an employment case. You can look at simple things like first email sent, last email read, open times, and start building stories without ever looking at document content. And litigators' bias is to jump right into the data, start reviewing emails. But there's a lot of things you can do up front to stage the files appropriately, to start prioritization in a smart way, and really grease the wheels towards your goals.
Yeah. Vinny, anything to add on metadata?
Yeah, I actually had something to add about email threading too.
Yeah,
Another thing that I find is very helpful is to thread opposing data with your data. That way, which sets of documents from opposing you don't need to look at because you've already seen it. Quickly eliminate documents because you've already seen it in your own client's data set. As it regards to metadata, we had this example actually just a couple weeks ago where we were doing some data set reduction for a client here, and they had something crazy like 250,000 JPEGs. Spot checking them, I looked at them, they were mostly company logos. Sprinkled in there were actual photos. And kind of Joey, what you were talking about in terms of the metadata, no metadata was provided, which is a challenge. But what we found was the metadata of pictures was in the text. So you had all that EXIF data in terms of camera model, camera make, shutter speed, location. So I was able to run some key search terms, mainly things like iPhone X, which is what they were using to take these pictures. And I was able to segregate for the client which JPEGs were actual photos that they cared about and which JPEGs were just company logos. So a really good use case of using non-traditional metadata to organize your documents.
Thanks, Vinny. I think we have another question from one of our guests who's joining us today. Vinny, from your perspective, which is better, TAR 1.0 or 2.0, and why?
It is definitely TAR 2.0, right? I do remember the days of TAR 1.0. For those of you who don't, basically you have a control round and then you have additional rounds of confirming the computer coding. On the administrative side, you might not have seen this on the client side, but on the administrative side, there's a lot of setup that goes into that. Whereas in TAR 2.0, specifically relativity active learning, it's very easy to set that up and monitor. So for that, I think definitely TAR 2.0.
Depending on the jurisdiction and the matter at hand, there may be a limitation on which TAR model you can use. So for instance, the Department of Justice model, e-discovery orders, speaks specifically about TAR 1.0 in certain contexts. So if you have a choice, we're going to prioritize efficiency, the best practice, lowest effort, best outcome. However, deployed TAR 1.0 can yield the same results. The client should know there's a bit more iteration and setup time, and the sequencing is really important, as opposed to the active learning that is moving in real time with the progress. You've got to stage your resources appropriately, go through the training rounds, and react to new data sets that are collected and added to the case.
Is there a 3.0?
It's coming.
All right. Do we know anything about it?
Likely large language model based predictive coding, content clustering, and pivoting off of the contextual data that's independent from human judgment the computer picks up.